been chopped up. Oh my God, he said someone broke into his house.
They robbed Paul Quandt and left him tied up on the kitchen floor. His wrists were taped together. There's a large amount of blood on the floor.
There was no explanation for this level of violence.
My dad was a disabled veteran. Who could have done this, and why would somebody do this to my father?
I could see a partial tag. This was probably the victim's vehicle. The suspect decides this is time for him to run.
As they picked him up, a gun fell out of his waistband. There was a problem.
So we have one suspect, that's it here.
We were at a loss for where the second suspect was located.
The detectives were asking all sorts of questions, and I told them that Paul had caretakers there in the daytime.
Do you know Mr. Quandt?
I used to work for him.
There was literally nothing to connect her to the scene itself.
What we had to do now was figure out exactly who did what.
I don't know what you told them and all this kind of stuff and everything, but I don't think you're being straight up.
I live in Blues Creek. It's in northwest Gainesville, Florida. It's very quiet and it just feels really comfortable. I always felt that this was a really safe neighborhood. I was never afraid to go out by myself or be here by myself at all. And then January 9, 2012, it was close to midnight, and I heard a car screeching, and I could see lights in my front bedroom window. The next thing I know, the doorbell was ringing. I jumped out of bed, and needless to say, I was terrified.
911, what's the emergency? My next door neighbor has been chopped up. Oh my God, he's in his wheelchair. He's been my neighbor for 8 years.
What's his name, ma'am?
His name is Paul Quandt. They're calling.
We're getting you some help. Just stay on the line. Stay with him. Okay, they're coming to your house as fast as they can. Tell me exactly what happened.
He's banging on my door. He is covered in head to toe in blood. He said someone broke into his house. They tied him up.
Okay.
He is beaten to a pulp.
How many people broke into his house?
How many people, Paul?
Well, this is a girl and a guy.
Oh my God. A man and a woman.
Can you ask him when they left his house?
About 30 minutes ago, he thinks. So what did they want? They cleaned his face out. And they stole his Cadillac, a white Cadillac Eldorado, disabled veteran Florida tax.
Okay.
Oh, I know. She's been in the ambulance. I'm so sorry.
By that time, his consciousness was fading. He had a big laceration on his head. There was a big cut on one of his arms. You couldn't even see his skin for the blood. The paramedics took Paul to Shands University Medical Center. Maybe a lesser man couldn't have been that strong or that determined to come over, but he had a will to live and a will for justice, and he wanted someone to say one last time to his children that I love you. And I felt unbelievably honored that he came to me to help him.
We were in bed, and the doorbell rings. It's Gainesville Police Department. And they say, your father's been attacked. You need to go to the hospital. Who could have done this, and why would somebody do this to my father? My dad moved out to Blues Creek in 2007. He was a disabled veteran, and he lived by himself.
He was disabled a long time, and it was very important to him that he be independent. All the neighbors loved him. I mean, you would just always hear about, oh, Mr. Paul, or, you know, Mr. Paul and the dog. And he had a lot of people out there who knew what was going on with him, or were there for him, and they all kind of watch out for each other.
I was on the opposite side of town when this call came out. I knew there are officers that are going to be there a lot quicker than I am to make sure the scene is secure. So instead of going directly to the house, we're looking for the victim's Cadillac when we're on our way there. As I'm going south on 43rd Street, I go into Westchester, which connects to Blues Creek. And as I pull into that subdivision, there was a vehicle headed the opposite direction. And I could tell that it was a Cadillac.
4300 US 441.
I was headed to Mr. Quandt's house, and then the car was spotted, so I did a U-turn and went the direction that the chase was coming.
We pull up to the light. The vehicle stops maybe 100 yards short of the intersection. There was a wheelchair ramp on the back of it. He sits there for a second. I could see a partial tag, and at that point, I realized that this was probably the victim's vehicle. The suspect decides this is time for him to run. He accelerates to 100, 110 miles an hour. We're traveling south back into the city, and at 23rd Avenue, the car pulled out in front of the suspect. The suspect swerves to the right, and I swerve to the left with cars coming at me. And then I fall back in right behind the suspect vehicle. We were coming up on traffic on Southwest 5th Avenue and 13th Street. This is a college town, and there's going to be kids out everywhere. I'm concerned about the suspect, or me, striking an innocent victim.
All their officers started blocking other intersections to try to keep other people who were driving from coming and getting in the way of the chase.
I slow down for the intersections. The suspect didn't slow down. The suspect struck a vehicle that was sitting at the light. He then struck another vehicle that was sitting in one of the side streets. The adrenaline is very high at that point. I had no idea what his plan of action was. We need to get him in handcuffs as quickly as possible.
We found one person who had the same address as the first suspect. Couldn't find her, but we did find her boyfriend.
She's been my girlfriend for about 6 years.
Last night, did you talk to her?
No, she had to go to work.
We believe that he's covering up for his girlfriend.
On January 9th, 2012, after Mr. Quandt was severely beaten, there was a chase of over 100 miles an hour until the suspect crashed his vehicle. As I held him at gunpoint, other officers were able to remove him from the car. He's handcuffed, and we take him to the side of the road. I made sure I cleared the car, make sure there was nobody else in the car.
Okay, so we have one suspect. That's it here.
Several one suspect.
There's a problem. According to the 911 call, we knew that 2 people were involved in this crime, and the second suspect was a female. We didn't know who she was or where she was at. So at that point, I took the suspect over to a vehicle to be able to search his pockets. As they picked him up, a gun fell out of his waistband, and we found evidence on him, a couple bloody rolls of duct tape, a stun gun, some bloody latex gloves. But the suspect didn't have any identification on him. We didn't know who he was. He refused to give us information. He was being difficult. He wouldn't look at us, and he wouldn't talk to us at all about the other suspect that might be involved.
He had no injuries associated with the car crash whatsoever, but he was taken to the hospital as a precautionary measure. The only injuries they noted at the scene that were significant were his fists, likely from beating Mr. Quandt.
By the time I went in to see my father, it had been several hours. The doctors seemed at that point to be most concerned about swelling in his brain due to head trauma. His head was swollen up like a basketball, and
He was not recognizable.
yeah. I mean, certainly he wasn't conscious. Why would somebody do this to my father? My dad was funny. He was social. He was easy to get along with. You're always hopeful that, well, this is going to be okay.
One of the weirder things that we found out is 2 rooms down from him was the guy who did this.
And there was talk.
There was conversation.
We could go drag him out of that room and wear him out.
Right.
But
better
cooler heads
they
prevailed.
At the hospital, I went to check on the suspect to try to get more information, but he still refused to talk.
The suspect is arrested for attempted first-degree murder, home invasion robbery, fleeing and attempting to elude, and probably a bunch of other stuff that I can't remember right now. But he refused to be interviewed. He invoked his rights, and law enforcement tried to speak with him, but he refused to speak.
At that point, we knew that the only way to find out his identification was to fingerprint the suspect so we could run it through the automated fingerprint identification system to try to get his name. After that, I checked on Mr. Quandt. With the injuries he sustained, Mr. Quandt was still fighting for his life. But we were very much hoping that Mr. Quandt was going to be okay and that he would be able to tell us exactly who did what.
The house had been ransacked. The televisions were smashed, closet doors were open, the safe had been emptied, and there was blood. There was a lot of blood on the floor and splattered on the walls and the countertop. It was a violent incident that had occurred.
The skin on the back of Mr. Quandt's arm had been sawed off with a knife in about an 8-inch spot. And there was only one explanation for why that had occurred, and that was that he was tortured.
I've been to a lot of crime scenes in 38 years, and as far as just torturing someone and spending time trying to force someone to talk, this is the worst.
There was no explanation for this level of violence.
The crime scene's telling me that 2 people had robbed Mr. Quandt. They left Mr. Quandt tied up on the kitchen floor. His wrists were taped together, and he crawled over and got a bottle of cooking oil and found a knife where he was able to stab this vegetable oil, leak it down onto his wrist, and move back and forth and get the duct tape off his wrist. To be able to receive the beating that he received and the torturing he got and still make it to the neighbors, it's just incredible. The guy was tough. Because there's no forced entry, and the fact that Mr. Quandt had been tortured to get his safe open, I thought someone who knew Mr. Quandt and had been in the house probably was involved. At that point, from the fingerprints, we had gotten the information on who the suspect was that was driving Mr. Quandt's car. His name was Austin Mark Jones.
Austin Jones had a criminal record. He had been arrested for an aggravated assault, and he ended up being incarcerated for a period of time in the Columbia County Jail.
We knew Austin was involved, but we couldn't find any connection between Austin Mark Jones and Mr. Quandt. So we started doing some more research.
The detectives were asking all sorts of questions. I told them that Paul said there were 2 people in the house. They asked me if he had people coming and going, who's been in the house, who does he know, and I told them that he had caretakers there in the daytime.
One of the things that the VA hospital had set up with Dad was to have home health care people come into the home and help him out. There was one healthcare worker that he just didn't feel comfortable with. After she'd worked there briefly with him, he noticed one of his house keys was missing. Could it have gotten misplaced? Absolutely. But he had a concern, so we did something about it. One of the first things we did, changing the locks in his house, and he requested that whenever these healthcare workers came, they had to sign a sheet of paper saying, yeah, they were here and these are the things they did. And they would give him a copy of it. Well, he filed those copies.
We found the stacked papers in a drawer next to the TV in the living room. And of course, we started going through all the names of the home health care nurses that had been to Mr. Quandt's house and comparing the addresses that they had with the addresses we found for Austin Mark Jones. And we found one person who had the same address in the past, and that was Miranda Martin. At that point, we know the connection is there. We needed to find Miranda and find out what was going on.
Austin Jones, the suspect we arrested for the beating of Paul Quandt, he invoked his rights, and law enforcement tried to speak with him, but he refused to speak.
We suspected that the second suspect may have been one of Paul's home health care nurses. We found one person who had the same address in the past as Austin Jones, and that was Miranda Martin. First place we looked for her was at her listed address here in Gainesville. Couldn't find her, but we did find her boyfriend.
Chad McKee said that they lived in that apartment together. He didn't seem all that surprised to see us.
We asked him to come in and speak with us.
How you doing? I'm all right. How are you? Good.
Your boyfriend was very cooperative, and we need to get as much information as we can, as fast as we can, so that we can locate Miranda Martin.
What can you tell me about Miranda?
She's been my girlfriend for about 6 years.
Do you know where she's at right now?
As far as I know, she was at work.
You know a guy by the name of Austin?
It's Miranda's cousin.
He's in jail. Or he's at the hospital. He's fixing to go to jail.
All I can tell you about Austin is that I know he has been in trouble a few times. But other than that, I don't really know Austin.
When's the last time you heard from Miranda?
It was 2:54 a.m. She told me she was at her work, like in her patient, had fell asleep. And that was really, I just told her I was watching a movie.
What time was Miranda supposed to get off work?
She told me 8.
Well, we don't want you caught up in something that you shouldn't be caught up in. Because what we're investigating is very serious crime. Attempted murder, home invasion, robbery, a lot of bad stuff.
Detectives told him the gravity of the situation. He didn't show any outward signs of nervousness.
It would be really out of character for her to do anything like what you're talking about. I mean, I've been with Miranda for 6 years, and she hasn't done anything against the law other than traffic citations.
It's possible she's not involved in this.
No, I know, like I said,
it's possible our information has led us to her, and when we finally reach her, we'll find that she wasn't at all who we were looking to speak with.
Detective Honeycutt is playing a good cop, being understanding and nice.
Well, if you will, hang tight, and we're going to meet with the sergeant and make sure he's good with everything.
Our strategy from there was to have Detective Joe Mayo come in and play the bad cop.
I'm thinking maybe his subdued behavior and his attitude is because he's covering up for Miranda.
Listen, dude, I don't know what you told them and all this kind of stuff and everything, but I don't think you're being straight up.
I did come more aggressively towards him. We were trying to see if there's a change in his relaxed behavior and his body language.
Now, I find it hard to believe that she's been your girlfriend for several years, and you don't know anything.
I mean, what are you asking me if I think that my girlfriend?
I think that she asked you about it. She mentioned it in front of you.
She didn't mention it to me. I'm just as shocked as you are to find out that you guys are knocking on my door at whatever time and asking me if my girlfriend's committed attempted murder when she had to go to work, was what she told me.
By this time, we've got detectives making contact with Miranda's company, finding out that she's not at work.
When you just talked to her manager, she said she's not working today. Not at all. Why is she lying now about going to work?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Even though I told him she was lying and she wasn't at work, he seemed subdued once again, and his posture was sitting back in the chair.
Like I said, man, I don't have anything to hide. I can only pray that it doesn't have nothing to do with her, but from what it sounds like, that's not really the case.
I was starting to think, okay, maybe he doesn't know anything. He is just really a subdued kind of individual and doesn't show outwardly his emotions.
We'd come to the conclusion that maybe she wasn't truthful with him and he wasn't a suspect, so we decided to get him to help us.
Call her, put her on speaker, say, hey, what's up? Are you coming home? What's the plan? and then we'll just
go
from there, see what happens.
It's voicemail.
The mailbox is full and cannot accept.
I don't think she's gonna pick up.
He did help, but she didn't answer the phone.
If Miranda was in trouble, if she couldn't come home to you, where would she go?
Their mom.
What's her name?
Kathy Martin.
At that point, we sent detectives to Fort White to Miranda's mom's house. We needed to find Miranda and find out what was going on.
When we arrived, we found out that Miranda was actually there. This was a very big moment. We told Miranda that we needed to speak to her about Austin Jones and that we needed to get information about a person that was robbed and that was brutally beaten. She kind of had her head down and she kind of glanced up once in a while. It was very obvious to me that she knew she was in a real bad situation. We asked her if she'd be willing to cooperate and give us a statement, and she voluntarily agreed. Her and her mother decided to drive themselves to our police headquarters. As we're driving down the road, we're wondering what conversations are happening between the mom and Miranda. Are they preparing a story? Are they trying to get their facts together? We always worry when people have time to prepare their stories, they can tell a really good lie, tainting their version of what happened.
Detectives had located Miranda Martin, who was the cousin of Austin Jones, and she used to be a past caregiver of Paul Quandt.
Austin Jones was still at the hospital and still was not talking with the police.
Based on everything we had, there was a second person. We also knew that the second suspect was a female. What we had to do was figure out who the second person was.
They had identified Miranda Martin as a person of interest, but we did not know the extent of her involvement.
Miranda and her mom agreed to come to the station to be interviewed.
We always wanted to separate the two from each other so that we can get a separate account from each person.
How you doing? I'm Randy Roberts. Do you know Mr. Quandt?
Yes, sir. I used to work for him.
Oh, okay. Well, he got hurt last night pretty badly.
She didn't seem to be too shocked by this information.
If I can help in any way, shape, or form, I'll be more than happy to do it.
Well, I appreciate that.
Our primary focus was to get additional information on where Miranda was that night. Create a timeline of events that occurred where we can actually piece together where she was at a certain time and where she claimed she was at a certain time.
And tell me about your day yesterday.
I left my apartment. It was around 11, 12, and I went out to my mom's.
Yesterday, between daylight and dark, Austin asked Miranda if he'd give him a ride to his lady friend.
I met up with some chick, and that's the last I seen him.
Okay. You gave Austin a ride to where?
It was a parking lot off of, I don't know if it was 13th or 441. I just dropped him off and left.
Okay, when you dropped him off and left him, where'd you go?
Dad thought I had to work, so I had to go back and pretend like I was getting my work clothes.
Why are you lying to Chad?
I lied to him last night because I just wanted to spend a night like with my mom and everything. And I didn't want him to get mad, so I told him I was working.
Miranda had admitted to lying to her boyfriend, Chad, about where she was at. And I think she's lying to us also.
She controlled that whole scenario with Chad. I think it illustrates, maybe the dark side of Miranda in terms of her, ability to manipulate the situation and be smarter than I think what she's displaying.
Okay, so you dropped Austin off.
And then left.
Then drove back to your mom's.
Yes.
So what time do you think you got to your mom's?
It was like 10.
Okay, so she left around dusk.
And made it in between 10 and 11.
Okay.
But it's, what, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 6 hours she's gone to just drop him off. Did she say if she went anywhere else after that, or?
Well, I thought she was going to work.
I felt that she did know that she wasn't at work, and she's covering up for Miranda. When people commit a crime, especially a violent crime. They talk to somebody that's important in their life. And I felt that she would have told her mom something.
If you can think of anything, I would much rather lay everything on the table. You know, I don't know. Maybe everything that you've told us is what you know, I don't know. But I just like to let people know that from the very beginning. So they're all family related here, and in my experience, that makes it much more difficult to get people to be honest about things because they're gonna want to protect each other.
So, you were in Fort White at 10 o'clock. I take it that you had your phone with you.
We believe that she was in Gainesville and not in Fort White at her mom's, but I've got to get her to trip up completely to get her to tell me more.
If your signal was bouncing off the tower towards Gainesville at 11 o'clock, would that surprise you?
Yeah, it would surprise me.
We didn't have the coordinates for the cell phone tower use yet, but it's a strategy to make her understand that we had ways of figuring out where she was and that she should start telling the truth.
If there is a reason, we want you to be able to explain it now before...
Okay, because I thought my boyfriend was cheating on me, okay? So I drove back just to see if his car was in the parking lot.
You drove by where?
My apartment.
Miranda kept changing her story. I was home at my mom's to now I'm going to check up on my boyfriend because he might be cheating on me.
And you got back to Gainesville at what time now?
It was around like 1 or 1:30.
It was a big thing for us, for her to put herself in the area at the time the crime occurred. At that point, we know there's a lot more that Miranda did and participated in and planned than she's still letting on.
We have some reservations about where your daughter was last night. Please, be honest.
She spent the night at my house last night. She made it in between 10 and 11. She rented the movie Paul, and we watched that.
You're wrapped up in this thing. Because now you got your mom lying for you. Mama knew you weren't there.
Today, did she tell you to come in here and tell us this story? Did she tell you to come in here and say, Mom, tell him I did this, tell him I did that, help me, I'm in trouble?
As the interview with Miranda's mom continued, we realized that it wasn't really going anywhere. She seemed like she had committed herself to a particular story that may have been prearranged on their drive down to the police station, and so we concluded the interview with her.
It was disappointing that Miranda Martin's mother had not come off her story. So we knew we had to keep on working on Miranda, peeling back the layers to get the truth.
How many times total you think you worked for Paul?
Well, it was 3 days a week.
At least once a week, I guess, you'd make his bed.
Yes.
Okay.
The bed sheets, everything that took off the bed, put in the washer, and then put back on the bed.
So you never got anything off the closets?
The only time I ever went in the closet was just I hang up stuff, and that's it.
Okay, so you saw the safe there?
Oh, I didn't think that was like a safe or anything.
What do you think it was?
I thought it was just like a box thing, like a metal box.
I was getting a little aggravated with the lying that she was doing.
And be honest with me. What was the reason for bringing him over here? And be honest.
He was supposed to meet with some girl. I dropped him off.
You dropped Austin off just down the road from Paul's house, right? Miranda, be honest with me. So you dropped him off just down the road from Paul's house, right?
Yes.
She gave a little bit of information about dropping Austin off right down from the house, but she wouldn't go any further.
I thought he was meeting some girl, and that's that. That's honestly it.
I took a break. I was a little frustrated, and sometimes strategies involve putting in different people. We thought we needed to have Lieutenant Alvosa come in fresh face. Maybe she'll give more.
Miranda, this is Will. Miranda, we want to clarify something, okay? And
There are two phases to an interview. There's an interview, and then there's an interrogation. But by the time Will Alvosa comes in, he's coming in now in an interrogation. An interrogation is forcing people to confront the fact that they're in significant trouble.
the doctor felt there was so much brain damage that you had no hope of him ever being a functioning human being. Ultimately, my sisters and I were going to have to make a decision. Do we let Dad go?
Gainesville Police Department, they were there constantly to just keep us updated. They were very adamant they were going to get to the bottom of this. They were not going to get some sleep. They were not going home until they got to the bottom of it.
At that point, Austin Jones still refused to speak. He went from the hospital to the jail and is waiting for his trial.
Miranda, I know we've been talking a long time to Detective Joe Mayo. Every time we come outside, there's a little bit of more information that you've disclosed. And that's why we keep coming back in here and asking you some more questions, okay? Because nothing seems to be adding up.
We felt certain that Miranda was involved.
What we had to do now was figure out exactly who did what.
I get it now.
She seemed to be one of these individuals that told a lot of stories, but we knew we had to be patient and just keep at it.
So I want you to pay attention. I'm gonna ask you some specific questions, okay?
Yes, sir.
When you guys went there last night, okay, and when you guys drove up there, you know, whatever you planned to do, did you expect it to unfold the way it unfolded? Did you expect Austin to act like that? Miranda, this is important. Things changed, right?
My tactic was to really make suggestions and let her answer the questions.
Things changed, right?
Yes, sir. I thought you were just gonna scare him, just not her, just scare him.
I'm like, thank the Lord, we finally got her admitting that she did drop Austin off with the intent of him making contact with Paul Quandt, and not for Austin to see a girl.
Okay, so what was Austin's new plans now?
I guess he just wanted everything.
I haven't seen everything that he's got, so you tell me what everything is. What does he want from Mr. Paul?
I didn't care about what he got or anything. Like, I didn't even want Austin to go in the first place.
But he did go, and you knew he was going there to scare him.
Brenda, did he tell you to wait for him?
I waited for him down the street where there was like a house for rent.
It must have been hell waiting. Did you ever go in the house just to see what was going on to get him?
Did you try to stop him?
I was only at like past the doorstep for a little while, and I froze.
Okay.
She finally has put herself there with Austin at Paul Quandt's residence, but she's just showing peripheral complicity in the crime. We still needed more admissions from Miranda if we were going to charge her for her involvement.
So let me ask you, when you're just standing there, right? Were you in shock? Did you hear Mr. Paul yell for help?
I couldn't hear anything. It was...
Miranda, what was he saying?
It was just, honestly, I just couldn't hear anything.
It takes a lot to push somebody to that point and to inflict those kind of injuries that Paul Quandt had. So I know he wasn't being quiet. If I could just put her there and tell her that she was there, she would reinforce and she would confirm that Mr. Paul Quandt was begging for his life. One of my tactics with Miranda was to ask her the same questions over and over again, because every time Miranda tells us her version of the story, she's not telling me the truth, but she was telling me little pieces of the truth.
What time last night did you go over to Mr. Paul's house?
Between 9:30 and 10.
Between 9:30 and 10. And who went?
Austin went first, and then I followed. Austin rang the doorbell, and the next thing you know, he just pushes it open.
Did Mr. Paul see you?
I don't think he had a chance after Austin just pushed him.
Do you follow him into the, you follow Austin in?
Yes, so I was standing like at the edge. He was like throwing a mask at me, put this on.
And that opens up a whole bunch of questions. Well, why are you wearing a mask? You know, unless you didn't want Mr. Paul Quandt to know who you were.
You threw the mask at you, told you to put her on?
Yes, sir.
She was really clinging to that minimization of, I didn't want to do it, but Austin made me do it.
And what color was the mask?
It was a red Elmo.
The Elmo mask, I think, is pivotal in terms of whether or not, things happen impulsively or whether or not this is planned and organized and this is premeditated. And I think that's what it illustrates.
So you step in, and then where do you go from there?
That's when he had like a PIN number or whatever and was unloading everything.
He had a PIN number? Okay, so he got Mr. Paul's PIN number?
For the safe.
Okay. So did Austin tie him up?
Yes.
Mr. Quandt, in my opinion, was not giving up the information about the safe and the ATM PIN number, and they were going to force him, whether that was by threatening him by destroying his property or threatening him by cutting him open with a fillet knife. They were going to get that information, and they did.
And what was Mr. Paul saying when he was being tied up?
I just wanted her to admit to me that she was there and she heard this man getting beaten.
Was he begging for his life?
He just kept saying, I'll give you everything you want. Please stop. Oh, that hurt.
And what was Austin hitting him with?
It looked like his fist.
His fist? And did you see Mr. Paul bleeding? Yes? Okay.
I believe we were making progress with her, and I was trying to get her to express and show that she was doing nothing to stop Austin from what he was doing. So she didn't intervene. And I'm still not convinced that she wasn't participating in that beating either.
I didn't know if Austin was about to do something to me next.
Okay.
She was ready to sort of characterize herself as a victim. Mr. Quandt was still at the hospital in intensive care. So we knew that his situation was dire, but I felt like because Miranda, through Comfort Keepers, had been to Paul's house before, the physical evidence might not be strong enough with the jury.
Miranda Martin was legally permitted and should have been in there, so finding her fingerprints would have been meaningless. Finding her hair would have been meaningless. Finding her DNA would have been meaningless.
So if we didn't have those admissions or confessions from her, there was a real fear. She could get away with that crime.
So now you're into the house. You know that Austin's threatening him. You know that Mr. Paul's begging for his life. You know that Austin's hitting him, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
At this point in the interview, we had been talking to Miranda for 6 hours, and she kept adding on to the story, but she was still trying to minimize her actual involvement.
And you're saying Austin's collecting everything in the house to take it. So what did Austin take?
I seen him with a box of stuff.
A box of stuff?
I don't know what all was in the box.
But from her body language, I could tell that she was getting tired. She had been through such a traumatic event from the night before, and she was starting to wear out from being up all night.
Is there any chance that maybe you collect anything in the house? Did you take anything?
Austin just kept telling me, take it, take it.
And where did you put that stuff?
In the trunk of his car.
Did you drive the Cadillac out of the garage?
Yes, he made me drive to the bank.
You guys drove to the bank to use a debit card at the banks?
Yes.
What bank did you go to?
Capital something.
Did you go to an ATM machine? If we get some video from that ATM, is it going to be you?
Yes.
Her admissions were piecemeal. They were small admissions over long, lengthy interview. But eventually, Miranda Martin had finally confessed. She absolutely implicated herself in the crime.
How much money did you take out?
4.
So you took out 400? Okay. Where'd you go next?
To a bank on Newberry, but it had exceeded.
Oh, exceeded limit?
But that was you too. I mean, if we pull the bank records,
It's me.
it's you. Were you wearing a mask?
Yes.
Wearing a mask while you were doing it. Okay. What are you feeling right now, Miranda?
I'm the worst person in the whole entire world, and I let something bad happen to somebody that didn't deserve it, and I should have stopped it.
Do you feel responsible for it?
So at this point in the interview, I was satisfied that we had established that she was that second person that was responsible for the home invasion and for the beating of Mr. Paul Quandt.
While I never believed that she was completely truthful in what she said, she was truthful enough for me to prosecute her for everything I intended to prosecute her for.
Right after we finished interviewing Miranda, we searched her car and we found her journal. She actually had detailed that she wanted to rob Paul Quandt on, I believe, Christmas Day, but she couldn't because I think he had some people over.
The other things that were found in the car that were important was a key that was later identified to be from the locks on Mr. Quandt's house before he changed them.
She actually was the mastermind. Her cousin Austin, he was just the brute force. He was just the enforcer. That's all he was.
Mr. Paul was doing real bad. I mean, real bad. We don't know if he's gonna make it or not. You know. So.
We'd see in the interview room Miranda get emotional, but I don't think she regretted anything that she did to Paul Quandt. She got caught, and that's what she regrets.
Miranda Martin and Austin Jones were charged with attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit home invasion robbery, and conspiracy to commit burglary of an occupied dwelling. If Miranda Martin had not confessed, we would have had a significant circumstantial case against her. There was literally nothing to connect her to the scene itself. Would that connection have been good enough to sustain a conviction? I don't know. Probably not.
The next day, we found out both of them were in custody. So, and there was a comfort in that, knowing that we now know who did it.
I felt positive and good about solving the crime, but the overwhelming feeling was them getting some justice.
The hospital was great. They allowed everybody that wanted to be there to
We had a room full of people.
The doctor came in and started turning off machines and pulling tubes. We all said our goodbyes. I'd like to think he could hear us, but I don't know that that's the case. And he slipped away. There's a certain comfort in knowing that as long as we can talk about him, as long as he's in our hearts and in our minds, his legacy lives on. It's his family. That's his legacy.
For more about Criminal Confessions, go to oxygen.com.